Well, if you look at my screen, Shabuze, well, I never heard of this dude. Right? That's how much I've tuned out from this bullshit. Even though he's Nigerian American, I should know his stuff, but I don't listen to this stuff. But anyway, this Nigerian American said something at the Grammys that has gotten these FBAs going crazy. Now, if you look at the top of the screen, it's Black Alpha Network. This guy is like a chief dick rider, Tariq Nasheed dick rider. But I've been noticing a trend ever since me and him had that back and forth. I've been noticing a trend, especially after Tariq went to Africa. He's starting to use the word Black Americans for his bullshit. He's trying to bring all Black America into his bullshit. He used to be specifically FBA. They're trying to get a collective rage. When the topics are one of those things that have collective rage, uh, they uh, they try to change the titles to make it more mainstream. Okay, so I'm noticing a lot of that with them. These guys are just idiots, man. But anyway, I guess the topic of conversation here is who built America, right? Who built America? Tariq Nasheed says Nigerian American country singer Shabuze won a Grammy and told the lie that immigrants built this country. This country was built by foundational Black Americans who are not immigrants. And that is a bold lie. Okay. That is a bold lie. Take your emotions out so that we get to the the facts. Okay. We get to the facts. There's nothing wrong with that. All right, so we're going to break it down. There's about three phases of American development. Phase one was your colonial economy, the early republic, 1607 to 1820. The northern colonies or the states in the north was a mixed economy or a proto capitalist economy. So, small farming, shipbuilding, fishing, trade. Most of the labor was family labor, apprenticeship, a little bit of slavery, but it wasn't central like in the South. The southern colonies was the economy was plantation based, right? Tobacco, rice, indigo, and later on cotton. The labor was on enslaved Africans, which was the core labor force. The northern economies were completely more dynamic and robust than the southern economies. And that still pretty much holds to this very day. The North developed skills, trade networks, and flexibility, and the South developed wealth concentration, a heavy dependence on slave labor. So the guys that make this argument typically go based on the fact they equate the we built America to the free labor that the South received. Even though the Southern economy was not the strongest, the North very much dominated the South, right? It's very evident. This is all in the books. We're not making anything up here. So that assumption is a lie. Did they contribute to America? Obviously, yes, they did, but they did not build America. Right? They're making the notion of build as if they literally set this whole thing up, and that is not true. That is far from the truth. The phase two, market revolution and early industrialization. We're talking about 1820 to 1860. The northern economy had undergone some rapid changes. There were textile mills, iron production, railroads and canals. Some of the major projects was the Erie Canal in 1825, which supercharged New York City as we know it today. The main labor in that phase in the northern economy was Irish and German immigrants.
Between 1820 and 1860, thousands of German immigrants arrived on American shores. Their numbers peaked in 1848 after a democratic revolution in the German states failed, forcing those revolutionaries to flee across the Atlantic Ocean.
They go to the big port cities, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, on down into the South, and especially New Orleans. And German immigrants will settle both in the cities, so you start to see Kleindeutschlands, little Germanys, forming in almost every large American port city. But Germans, many of them come as farmers, so they press on into the interior.
Native-born Americans looked upon German immigrants more favorably than the Irish, whom they associated with poverty, illiteracy, and crime.
German immigrants benefited in some ways or had a better reputation than Irish immigrants did. Now, they were not welcomed with open arms. You can go back and find anti-German cartoons and anti-German campaigns and anti-German riots that take place in cities before the Civil War. But they were comparatively seen as a better class of immigrants than the Irish. One thing that was key is that most of them, or a lot of them, came as city dwellers and with skills. And with education. So when they came to big American cities, there wasn't quite the same sort of jarring shock that the Irish felt.
So if this guy says immigrants built the country, he has a point. The same way when Black Americans say slavery built America, they have a point, right? But it is, both sides are not completely true. America was not built by one particular group. And it feels like every time one group wants to take credit for its totality, and that is not true. Okay? I don't even know why they are waked up about this. They know it's not true, but they've been fed this lie for so many generations that it's hard to explain this to them, even though this is in their own literature, in their own textbooks. Then urbanization began within this phase. Capital reinvestment into factories, infrastructure, and technology. The South, however, became the cotton kings. Okay, so by 1860, cotton was about 60% of US exports. The main labor here in the South was enslaved people. Okay, a bit of Southern infrastructure was railroads that connected the cotton plantations to the ports. But the roads were very poor in the South, right? So there was not very major infrastructure projects that went on in the South. A lot of the capital was reinvested in land and also in enslaved people. I guess the key point here is that the North was actually diversifying and undergoing rapid industrialization. The South was doubling down on a single commodity, which was cotton. And then we get into a phase three, which is what most people credit for America's takeoff, the post-Civil War takeoff, 1865 to 1914. This is the real who built America era. The Northern economy exploded. Okay, so this is Carnegie steel, Rockefeller oil, the manufacturing. A lot of the labor here was European immigrants, nobody disputes that, and rural migrants, people that moved from little towns into bigger cities like in New York City in search for better jobs. This is also when they launched the national rail system that connected literally most of the cities and states of the United States of America, bridges, ports, factories, etc. This is also when America becomes the world's number one industrial economy by the 1900s. What happens in the South? The slavery gets abolished, which led to an economic collapse of the South. Okay. Then new systems got introduced, which is, as we know, it's sharecropping, convict leasing. The labor here at the time is freed slaves, also freed blacks, but they were locked into low wage, coercive labor. So a lot of that tactics still remained, right? But you also have to understand the Southern economy was not doing the best. The North had already taken off, and the North by itself had propelled America to the number one most industrial economy. His claim that immigrants built America holds more even firmly than the slave output of the South, which had collapsed by the end of the Civil War. So this is very critical. Industrial America is built primarily or was built primarily in the North. Nobody disputes that. The Southern economy became very dependent and underdeveloped by design. Remnants of that still remains today, right? The northeastern states are extremely rich to this very day compared to the South, like Louisiana and Mississippi, Texas is an exception because of the oil, right? In the new economy, because of the oil, Texas is an exception. You get into a national infrastructure, which is the 1930s. to the 1960s. Here we start to get power grids, some more advanced roads, bridges, dams. We get into World War II, massive industrial mobilization because they got to make weapons and ammunition. So steel was the main driving force for the wars. Post-war, the interstate highway system was launched, airports, suburban expansion. Then the southern economy starts to catch up partially. Okay, most of that catch up was due to federal spending. All right, so some federal spending starts to flow to the south. Military bases, if you're wondering why there's so many military bases in the southern part of the US, that was part of a project to revitalize the southern economies because they were struggling. So the output of slave labor was not enough by itself to build this, but it was part of the build process. Whenever they say this, they do it in a way to minimize the work that some of these other groups, or the things that these other groups contributed to today's America, right? And are continuing to contribute to today's America. Okay. So by this point, infrastructure is federalized, the growth is national, a little bit of inequality is baked in, but Tariq Nasheed is wrong here, which I have explained. And, you can go back and read any history books, it's there. This is not even such a long time history, right? So you can go back and do some research on your own. It doesn't matter how you explain this, because some guys know this already. It doesn't matter how much you explain this, they will always hold on to that because a lot of this is also political and they don't want to let go, right? But a lot of this is political, even though it's not true. So no, the foundational blacks did not build America. Okay. If anything, their contribution was very minimal. If you look at the economic output of the South, it was not enough to build America by itself. Also, even though their labor was free, their labor was also very unskilled. So it wasn't enough to engineer roads or engineer anything. They were just like workers, like, labor. Go pick a crop. That's essentially what it was. They were not inventing some machinery or prototyping some machinery that kind of tip the scale industrially. That's not what happened. But whenever they make these talking points, they make it look like that is what was going on, and they were the only ones that were building these things, and everybody else was not contributing. All these immigrants that came from Europe were not part of the process, even though they did most of the heavy lifting. To summarize, who did the work? Who physically built America? Pre-1965, enslaved Africans, they built agricultural wealth, they cleared land, planted crops, built local roads and local ports. 1865 to 1914, European immigrants come in, they start build railroads, steel mills, mines, factories, bridges. Then post-slavery, you have Black Americans participate in railroads, southern agriculture, urban industrial labor, because a lot of them also moved from the south to the north to work, to participate in these industries. Later on, auto plants, Detroit, shipyards, construction, and also poor and working class whites. Mining, you remember the coal mines in West Virginia, and so forth, manufacturing, construction. So America's infrastructure was a multi-ethnic working class labor, not one particular group, like they make it out to be. It was a multi-ethnic working class labor, not one group. So they did not build it. They were part of the process, and so were immigrants. So now, why slavery built America is half truth. Did it play a role? It did, but it's not entirely the truth. Slave labor generated enormous private wealth. It fueled global cotton trade. It enriched the southern elites. But what it did not do is create industrial capacity, build national infrastructure, develop diversified economies. These three things were the most instrumental to post-depression expansion of the American economy. What this guy is saying is not something that should trigger the blacks to make long live streams as if he said something that was crazy. No, it's not. Uh, Immigrants till this very day are contributing. Like he said, his mom was a nurse and has contributed to saving a lot of lives in this country while raising good, what I presume to be very good, law abiding children, which one of them today has won a Grammy. And that is what we should be celebrating. But instead, these blacks are doing live streams, complaining because the thing he said does not make them feel good. You know, my feel good people always feel a certain kind of way when you say things like this that doesn't include them or that feels like it's a knock on them. And even though this is not a knock on them, both sides, both claims are not whack or crazy. You know, what he's saying is pretty much part of the cohort of people that did participate in building America. You know, same with the Europeans, the Jews, and everybody else that has migrated here. The medical doctors, the engineers, the physicists, the mathematicians, the guys at NASA. Everybody plays a role. You should ask yourself, what role are you playing for the next generation of Americans to enjoy America? It feels like a lot of people are starting to move away from putting in their efforts in making America great. Instead, they're always talking about what their ancestors did. I need to start seeing conversations now about what you are doing for the next generation. That is where the focus should be. Okay. And don't talk to me about music and entertainment. You know, with artificial intelligence coming in, we gotta be very careful because minorities are the ones that are gonna be impacted the most. And they will be the ones to complain the most too. So spend a lot of these energies targeting the next frontier of America's expansion and make sure that you're part of it, directly or indirectly. I think that's where the focus should be. But it's low IQ people like Black Alpha Network and Tariq Nasheed are on the internet worried about their feelings. Get over it. All right? Get over it.